Eric Zanzik. I'm in Rustburg District. Definitely wanted to second those point from the last speaker. My vehicles are 20-year-old rust buckets, and personal property tax on those items aren't really doing much for me. So reducing the tax there for that isn't really much. I did want to just mention, I didn't want to reiterate any other points that were already made. And I know a lot of the conversation has centered around the real estate tax rate. And I didn't want to rehash that. So I wasn't really even planning to say anything tonight, but I did want to commend Administrator Rogers. Thought it was awesome that he told us what real estate tax rate he would recommend, and then brought us a budget with a much lower rate because he knew that that's what our elected officials had been asking him. And I thought that was commendable. And I really thought that was something worth pointing out is not only do we have our elected officials fighting for us, but we got county staff fighting for us too. So I thought that was pretty cool and encouraging. I think a lot of the discussion for this budget in the work session has really centered around the real estate tax rate and a lot of different tax rate scenarios. And I just would have appreciated a lot more analysis and a lot more explanation of a lot of the expenditures and a lot of the big expenditures, particularly. It kind of puts us in a box of the whole tax rate discussion when we have such a large expenditure that we need to accommodate. So from my own looking at the budget, I just noticed that something that hadn't been explained or even really discussed was that social services compensation went up almost $400,000. That was a 13% increase year over year. There's really no explanation for that. CIP was approved last month, and one of the big items on that was the county vehicle replacements went from about 400,000 to 600,000, and it's projected to continue increasing to 750,000, which we all know vehicles are getting more expensive. And I know that there's probably a good reason for that, but just there's no conversation about that, and that's a 65% year over year increase. So I just thought that was interesting that nothing was really discussed about that. And definitely, schools budget is obviously one of our biggest transfer out, and it's very important. I thought it's difficult to come to the board, the county board meeting and talk about the school's budget when they have their own discussions for their own budget and their own board, but they released their budget to the public after it was already approved by the board this year, and deserves mention from this board, about the timing and whatnot. I mean, we couldn't even comment on their budget at the school's board meeting because they didn't release it. So that was unfortunate. But I did think it was interesting that if you look at Campbell County, we've obviously left the whole pandemic scenario. We're not dealing with the pandemic in Campbell County anymore, but the school's budget does remain at pandemic levels. Before COVID, it was at $80 million. Now it's at $100 million. And even when you remove COVID-related CARES funds and grant funds, you see that a lot of the increase isn't even to instruction-related expenses. The attendance office, executive administration, fiscal office, technology, health, media, and the principal's office all increased at a greater rate than those funds dedicated to instruction. So, and again, we gave them another $600,000 for operating expenses and didn't even ask them any questions, really. We just gave that as they requested. And then also, we did approve another $50 million to expand a high school that had fewer students this year than it did last year, and has 6% fewer students than it did 10 years ago. And yet we're going to expand that same school. So those kind of expenditures, especially $50 million high school expansion and renovation, which I know there have been conversations about, but it just, in terms of mean testing, it just doesn't, it seems a little bit out of whack. So to back up Dr. Gifford's points, looking back at the real estate tax revenue and what has been received and projected to be received, on average for the last few years, it's been around $700,000. The increases year over year for real estate tax. And this budget is a $4 million increase that we're expecting to get. And so I think that's a just startling jump from 700,000 to 4 million. And it seems to be just a step too far. So, but I am grateful that you guys give us the opportunity to make comments, and always opening up the floor for someone who didn't sign up in the first place and decided to speak anyway. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sansick.